and welcome to Ask an Atheist. My name's Rebecca Markert, and I'm the legal director here at FFRF.
And I am Andrew Seidel, the Director of Strategic Response here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Today we are talking about how the Supreme Court has, in the dead of night, robbed Texans of their bodily autonomy and effectively killed Roe v. Wade. As always, if you have questions about our topic today, and I think you're going to have quite a few, go ahead and drop them in the comments below or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
We touched on this issue a little bit last week, but now that we have an official order from the Supreme Court, we want to do a deeper dive. So to briefly overview, Texas passed the most restrictive abortion law in the country, SB 8, back in May. The law bans abortion procedures after 6 weeks of gestation, which is just 2 weeks after a missed period, and that's if you have a regular cycle, and before most women even know that they are pregnant. Even more outrageous, the law deputizes private citizens, anyone, anywhere in the world, to file civil suits against abortion providers or anyone who assists someone in attaining an abortion, offering a bounty reward of $10,000 and attorney's fees for a successful lawsuit.
Yeah, the law really flies in the face of clear, well-established law and precedent that has been around for 5 decades, including cases like Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. It is unconstitutional by any measure, but even though the law was challenged prior to going into effect on September 1st, the Supreme Court did nothing to stop it. And we have to remember, too, this is the same court which wouldn't let public health orders stop preachers from missing a single in-person Bible study. And they did nothing while a clearly unconstitutional law went into effect. Did nothing to protect the constitutional rights of Texans. So the inaction was bad enough.
But then, just before midnight on September 1st, in a 5-4 ruling, the High Court rejected a request to bar enforcement of the law. The majority wrote that abortion providers who had sought emergency relief from the court failed to meet their burden to block the law. The one-paragraph opinion was unsigned. Chief Justice John Roberts joined Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Stephen Breyer, and Elena Kagan in dissenting.
Yeah, I mean, one paragraph, I cannot get over it. There's been a lot said and written about this law and the Supreme Court's action and inaction and what it all means for Roe versus Wade.
Joining us today to help make sense of this, if there is sense to be made, is Professor Caroline Mala Corbin from the University of Miami School of Law. Her scholarship focuses on the First Amendment's speech and religion clauses, particularly their intersection with equality issues. She is prolific in these areas, churning out 3 or more law reviews every year and lighting up our Google alerts. She's been a great friend to FFRF and the Secular Coalition. Welcome to the show, Caroline.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So, did we miss anything in that recap?
I think one of the most startling aspects of the law is its scope. Many states have passed laws banning abortion at 6 weeks, as egregious as that is. But what's really unique about this law is that anyone can bring a claim. And by anyone, I literally mean anyone except a state official or a man who's raped a pregnant woman. But otherwise, they need not have any connection to the abortion. It doesn't have to be someone who knows the woman. It doesn't have to be someone in Texas. It can be anyone, anywhere. And the second thing that makes this incredibly expansive is that they can sue not only the abortion clinic, but anyone who helps a woman obtain an abortion. And not just anyone who helps the woman get an abortion, anyone who intends to help the woman get an abortion. And so this can cover your mom who gives you advice, or your rabbi who helps you find the address of a place, or your friend who loans you some money, or the Uber driver who brings you there. It really allows anyone to sue so many people who might be involved in helping a woman exercise her rights.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to cover here that it's almost overwhelming, and I think that's part of the point of the law, really, that it's meant to be overwhelming. And we go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the point of the law is really to harass clinics out of business, because they will suddenly be faced with an onslaught of litigation. They will be required to defend it no matter how frivolous. And even if they win, they won't get attorney's fees, because that's another aspect of the law. And so it really has been set up to be abused, and abused in a way that really puts clinics out of business.
Yeah, I mean, this is mob rule over the womb, and we know that it's going to hit Black and brown and poor Texans the hardest.
Absolutely, because wealthy women will find a way. Right? They'll be able to go to another state. They'll be able to find the time off work. They'll be able to get the child care. They'll have a car accessible to them. That's not something, I mean, abortion was already difficult enough, but requiring women now to travel vast distances to another state will really put it out of reach for many women in Texas. And as you pointed out, a particularly hard hit will be women of color and poor women.
And one thing I want to get into before we dive even more into the law is I want to touch on kind of an important aspect of this fight. This is a show that is produced by the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Rebecca and I both work for FFRF, and FFRF's goal, one of the two goals, is to defend the separation of state and church. And I think that for some people, the nexus between that fight and the abortion rights fight isn't always clear. But Professor Corbin, I mean, you've written many scholarly articles on state-church separation and religious freedom and the First Amendment. Can you help explain the relationship between the push?
Absolutely. And there are several different ways you can draw a link between abortion bans and separation of church and state. So let me mention a couple of them. One is the opposition to abortion is religiously based, right? The idea that life begins at conception and abortion is murder, that's religious doctrine. Or opposition to abortion may be rooted in the religious idea that sex should be for procreation only. Therefore, to have sex and not procreate is to go against God's will. Or another kind of religious inflection to opposition to abortion is there's the religious view that men and women have different roles, and women's God-given role is to be a mother. So a woman who rejects that role, again, is going against God's will. So one clear link is that abortion is really about religious beliefs. It's based in religious beliefs. And so anytime you enact a law banning it, is you're really enacting a religiously based law, in my opinion, I think. So that's one way, right? The link, which is to say opposition to abortion has religious roots. Another link that you can make is that the fact that there are so many of these laws and they're successful is an illustration of the Christian nationalism that it is very strong in this country. So I know you all probably talked about Christian nationalism before, but for those of you who are not familiar with the term, it's basically that Christian nationalists believe that the United States always has been, and should always be a Christian nation. In other words, it's the idea that the United States has like a special relationship with God, and that to stay in God's favor, the country, including its government, must follow Christian ideas. So it's basically the exact opposite of church and state, right? The Establishment Clause believes that church and state should be separate, whereas Christian nationalism believes that they should be one and the same. And part of that is having the government pass laws that embed Christian values and Christian ideas, and abortion bans are one of them. So it is yet another example of how we have sort of an issue of Christian nationalism in the country. I could go on, but that's a couple of
Those are great reasons. Thank you for that explanation. FFRF has always seen abortion as a state church issue. And in fact, 98.9% of our members support Roe v. Wade. And I want to get back to the Texas decision. It came from the shadow docket. We talk a lot about the shadow docket, and I think one of the reasons why this case is not getting covered as much, I mean, the media has touched on it, but I was surprised to find that nobody's marching in the streets over this. There's no big protests that came down immediately on Thursday. And I think it's because this took place on the shadow docket. Nobody really understands what that is. So if you could first tell us what that is, and then, in your opinion, tell us why you think they did this move on the shadow docket when they actually have another abortion case coming up this term, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, the Mississippi abortion ban after 15 weeks.
Okay, so normally, I think the shadow docket is really in contrast to the regular docket. So the regular docket is the Supreme Court decides to hear a case. There's a lot of briefing. There's dozens of amicus briefs. The Supreme Court hears oral arguments. They take months to think about and consider and draft opinions, and then they issue an opinion that's lengthy with elaborate reasoning. So that's the normal docket. That doesn't happen in the shadow docket. In the shadow docket, you don't have extensive briefing. You don't have any oral argument. It's usually in response to an emergency application. The opinion is short and has very little reasoning, which we saw, as you pointed out, this one was decided in the middle of the night, and the decision was a paragraph.
Yeah.
And so if it turns out that this is how they're overruling Roe v. Wade, it is definitely a way to do it out of the limelight.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Do you have a theory about why they chose to do it on the shadow docket as opposed to doing it the right way in the...
Again, strictly speaking, Roe v. Wade is still on the books, although not available to the women in Texas. So the abortion is still constitutionally protected in the rest of the country. So for those of you who find yourselves pregnant and are worried that you can no longer get an abortion, that is not true if you're not in Texas. So I don't want people, but it could presage a much more restrictive ruling in the fall. And why they decided to, I don't know. I don't know what, I don't know why they would. I mean, the thing is, so part of the point of the law was to evade judicial review. Part of it was, as Sonia Sotomayor pointed out, an act of defiance against the court's jurisprudence and against the rule of law by the state of Texas. And you would have thought the Supreme Court would want to slap down this challenge to its authority. It may be that its hostility to abortion is so strong that they're willing to let Texas get away with it.
Yeah. And I mean, it is the fact that the court didn't slap it down, it's spreading already, right? We're seeing other states, including Florida, already.
Florida, yes. Their senators in Florida are gung-ho. Fortunately, I don't think they come back into session until January. So we'll see what happens in the intervening months. But most definitely, you will see states all over the nation enact similar laws. And again, the key with this law was the attempt to insulate it from federal review before it went into effect. And the way that they did that is they explicitly said that no Texas officials could enforce it. Because usually when you sue to stop a law from going into effect, you sue the people responsible for enforcing it, and that usually a state has its officials enforce the law. But here they explicitly precluded them, so it's not clear who you're supposed to sue. And that was the sort of the trick they pulled that made it really confusing to know who to sue and who's the proper party to have federal court. So that was sort of the legal sleight of hand that they worked in this law. And so we're likely to see other states pull a similar maneuver.
And that bounty aspect of the law, I mean, that this bounty hunting that we're seeing kind of pop up, that harkens back to some of just the worst parts of American history. And I know I saw you talking about that a little bit. Do you want to expound on this, some of those terrible thoughts?
I mean, really, as I said, it's creating an incentive. They've created a financial incentive for people to harass abortion providers and those who help women exercise their rights. And they do this not only giving them a $10,000 reward every time they win a case, but also insulating them from ever having to pay attorney's fees if they lose. Yeah. So it's really a no-lose proposition, right? Because if you sue and you win, you get $10,000. If you sue and you lose, normally you're on the hook for attorney's fees, but this law explicitly excludes that as an available remedy for people who successfully defend the law. So again, the state is doing everything in its power to encourage people to bring these harassing lawsuits against abortion providers with the idea of putting them out of business.
Well, I have another question. So what's going on the ground in Texas right now? Do we know, are lawsuits being filed in state court? Are these bounties being, pursued?
I am not aware, because I looked before talking to you all today. The only lawsuit in state court that I'm aware of is I think Planned Parenthood has successfully won an injunction against, I think it's Texas Right to Life people.
Yes.
So what they're doing now is instead of just getting the law as a whole enjoined or temporarily stayed or temporarily prevented from going into effect, they're going like individual after individual and saying, you can't sue us, you can't sue us, you can't sue us. And so again, even if they're successful, it's an expensive and laborious process.
Well, it's infinite whack-a-mole, right? You can't. There's no.
Abortion has always been whack-a-mole. I mean, since the constitutional right was established, you have had states passing laws trying to limit it in some way. And they've actually had a great deal of success. Now, they've never gotten this close to eliminating it entirely. But I started at the ACLU Reproductive Freedom Project over 20 years ago, and already then this situation of one state law appears that's struck down as unconstitutional, and then another one, a different permutation arises, and then you have to challenge that one. I mean, this has been a never-ending struggle since women finally got the right to control their bodies. And again, I just feel like we're going backwards now rather than holding the line, which is really, really distressing. Again, it's hard to overstate how crucial it is for women to be able to control their reproductive lives. I mean, it's simply not possible to have a career, to finish school, to feel like a person in control of their lives if you can't control what happens to your body.
I would like to know what you think about what a post-Roe world looks like. I mean, even if the court comes down with the Mississippi case this next term, and they don't actually overturn it. They don't explicitly say, we overturn this law, but they effectively do so, which we've seen them do in other cases and other tests, like the Lemon test. Many of the justices are suddenly saying, hey, we've shelved that. Like, they didn't officially overturn it, but now it's no longer the standard. What does the post-Roe world look like?
Well, I mean, I think the best case scenario is that they would weaken protection, right? So the Supreme Court could either go whole hog and simply say it was a mistake to say the Constitution protected abortion in the first place, and now we are returning to the correct constitutional understanding. There is no constitutional right to abortion. Or as I said, the best case scenario is they can say, okay, the Constitution does protect abortion, but the protection is fairly minimal. And so no doubt, if they allow the right to survive, and that's no longer a sure thing, it would be in a truly weakened form so that most laws, even if they implicate the right, will not be considered to violate the right. And so what's going to happen is abortion, your access to abortion will very much depend on where you live, because states will decide how much to protect or how strongly to limit access to abortion. So there are some states that are going out of the way to really codify the right. And then there are some states that are ready to eliminate it if the Supreme Court overrules Roe v. Wade. So the bottom line is it will depend on state law. Your access to abortion will depend on what the state does or does not allow.
Well, so let's talk about some of the possible solutions then. We know that the House is going to vote on the Women's Health Protection Act. We've heard that the DOJ is going to be looking at enforcing the FACES Act more broadly, that Biden is going to be mobilizing HHS, that the Senate Judiciary is going to have hearings on the shadow docket. I think all of these are steps, but what do you think, is there even a solution here?
Well, I mean, they're dream solutions, right? We can expand the court and eliminate this majority of super conservatives.
Let's do it.
We could pass the Equal Rights Amendment and finally enshrine women's equality in our Constitution. We could, maybe we could pass a federal law protecting abortion right, or maybe even at least make medication abortion available to cross state lines. Mm-hmm. It's possible those things can happen.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I come back to expanding the court, expanding and rebalancing and correcting the court every time, because any one of the solutions that we were just batting around, or that I mentioned, in the run-up, they're still going to run up against the Supreme Court deciding whether or not they're valid, and we've got this 6-3 conservative majority for the foreseeable future.
So the petty side of me would really love for liberal jurisdictions. I want a tit for tat response. So I would really like for very liberal jurisdictions to pass similarly flagrantly unconstitutional laws with the same structure and see how the Supreme Court feels about this attempt to insulate a law from judicial review. So, for example, I think New York State should ban guns and say the state's not going to enforce it, only private citizens can, and for every successful suit, you get a $10,000 reward and no risk of paying attorney's fees. I think, Vermont should make it illegal to be unvaccinated. Mm-hmm. Same kind of any time you find someone who's not vaccinated, you can get, I think we really, and then we'll see. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah, I think, and I think one of the good examples of that too, at least to show how ridiculous what the Supreme Court decided to do here is the analogy to going to church. And not that any state should ban that, but if the law in Texas had been anyone caught going to church on Sunday mornings can be fined $10,000. If you knowingly aid and abet somebody going to church, you're fined $10,000. There's no doubt that the Supreme Court would jump all over that and overturn it and enjoin the enforcement of that in a second.
And my example is always if they had banned guns, which is a clear Second Amendment violation, there was no way they would say, the civil procedure issues are so complex and novel. Don't think you can actually be in court. And instead of just saying, we're going to stay the law and return to the status quo until we figure it out, which is what they ought to have done, they'd be like, but we'll let you lose your constitutional right to guns while it gets figured out. I mean, that would never happen.
Never.
Right?
Never
that would
happen.
never happen. It just would never happen, which I think brings us another issue is like, this is a court that is extremely, excessively solicitous of religious rights.
Yes.
And I think that this is yet another example of that. I mean, you mentioned earlier, right? The COVID cases, the challenges to the COVID cases, where they would allow churches exemptions, even though comparable secular activities were treated exactly the same way, or even more strictly. They still determined that religious organizations were being discriminated against. And they did not have to follow the same health care laws that everybody else did. I mean, and they did this by basically disregarding the science.
Yeah. I mean, really, what we're
is another theme. Like, there's so many themes like you can tease out, right? The excessive solicitude for religious observers, combined with their disdain and ignoring scientific evidence, gives you results like what we saw in the COVID cases, gives you results like what we're going to see with contraception. And it's just, it's distressing. I mean, I think there is a place for accommodating religious believers, but not if that accommodation is gonna harm third parties.
Yes.
And I think, unfortunately, that might have been the law once, but that is not the law now.
Well, I want to touch on one final point before we get to audience questions, and we actually have quite a few audience questions. But my final point is, where does this end? Because it's not just with abortion. Andrew, you wrote a piece in May predicting that Roe is not the end game, but the beginning, and that they're going to come for contraception next. Do you stand by that? And then I want to hear from Professor Corbin.
I mean, yeah, I do stand by it. I'm deeply concerned that this is just the beginning, that they're coming for contraception next. I'm worried that they're going to come for equal marriage in some way, shape, or form after that. I mean, if you go, I was actually rereading some of Alito's most terrible hits last night just for fun. And I mean, you know, if you remember, like in the Fulton case, he starts talking, which is just the Fulton v. Philadelphia case. He starts talking at the end of his opinion about Obergefell and how there people who are against equal marriage are not really bigots, and it's not fair to call them bigots. And I mean, to me, it's just haunting signaling about where the court is going to end up with this. And I feel like maybe that's a little Chicken Little, except, you know, 2 years ago we were talking about how the end of Roe is in sight if we don't do something, and now here we are today.
Well, even before that, I mean, there was reason that there was a women's march in 2017 and why women were crying on the night of the election in 2016.
Yes.
I 100% agree. I think they already have come for contraception, and we saw that in the Supreme Court case of Hobby Lobby, where this giant multi-billion-dollar company did not want to include certain contraception in its healthcare program because the company, like the billion-dollar company, said it was against its religious rights. And so they wanted an exemption from a federal law saying, hey, you know, as part of healthcare, you need to cover preventive care, including contraception. And they won. They won. They do not have to provide women who work for them with no-cost access to contraception. And I think they're already coming after same-sex marriage. I mean, we've already seen in Masterpiece Cake Shop, again, a very narrow decision, but the bottom line is a baker did not have to make a cake for same-sex marriage. He was exempted from anti-discrimination law. And in Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, again, a narrow decision, but the bottom line is still a Catholic social service organization that can refuse to consider same-sex parents in its program.
Yeah, they're just weaponizing religious freedom up and down.
Yeah. Well, I did want to make... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry. Religion is not meant to be, you've heard it before, but it's worth repeating. Religion is not meant to be a weapon. It's meant to be a shield, right? Yep. And historically, religious like religious liberty claims used to be brought by religious minorities who's just trying to practice the religion in a way that the majority culture made it difficult for them. So you might have a Jewish man who wanted to wear a yarmulke, or a Muslim who wanted to grow a beard, right? But today, the people bringing religious liberty challenges are not minority religions. They're the majority religion trying to impose their religious beliefs and practices on everyone else, which is a very different kind of religious liberty. And with this court, they are sadly often succeeding.
Well, and I said I wanted to make one last point, but Bruce just reminded me of another point that I wanted to make. Last week, when I was writing the press release and going through the order to pull out quotes that we could use, possibly from the Dissent, because that's really the only bulk of the literature we got on this from the court, it was really hard for me to not just cut and paste Sotomayor's entire dissent, because it was phenomenal. She comes out swinging every single time.
I actually have it open right here in front of me. I am 100% agree. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on.
No, that's okay. That's what this is about. So yes, I mean, the great thing is the Nation actually just did that for me. They just went ahead and printed her full dissent in full with a brief introduction about how awesome it was. But if you haven't seen it yet, you should definitely go and take a look. She really hit it out of the park.
And I do want to add that Rebecca did chat me like immediately afterward as she was working on it. She's like, we just need to run Sotomayor's whole dissent because it's so good. So she beat the Nation to the punch on that one.
I did. All right. Awesome. So, questions. The first one is from Hannah Larson. Are any of these pro-life activists working to provide comprehensive sex education and affordable birth control? You know, the things that actually lower abortion rates?
Yeah. No. I mean, no.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I think that shows that this is not really about protecting women, and it never has been. It's about controlling women. But,
yes. Yeah. I mean, again, this is not. The best spin would be, well, this is about protecting the unborn, but Texas does not care about children once they're born. Mm-hmm. I mean, I read recently that Texas ranks like 46 out of 50 states in terms of child well-being. They do not care about their children enough to make sure that they are fed and clothed and safe. Certainly, if they cared about their children, they would not ban masks in schools that endanger the lives of unvaccinated kids. So this claim that this is all about the children is really not supported by their actual policies.
Yeah, no.
Agree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never going to attribute intellectual consistency to the other side on this one, but anyway.
So the next question then is Ann Ben-Dixon. What are the chances we will expand or unpack the Supreme Court? And other than donating to FFRF, what are the best places to donate to protect reproductive freedom? Texas Planned Parenthood, ?
Go ahead, Professor.
Wait, so the first question is, will we actually expand the court? I'm not feeling optimistic these days.
Yeah.
So what can you do? Like, definitely donate to the groups that are fighting. Also, donate to your grassroots programs that are actually helping women get abortions. So there's a whole network of organizations that help women, like abortion action funds that help women fund their abortions. So that's another thing that you can do. A little bit more broadly is because protection will turn on what's available at the state and local level, you should get involved in state and local politics. So really try to persuade your legislatures to pass protections, or get active in politics yourself.
Yeah, I would certainly echo that as a possible solution. It's something that we say on this show all the time is people need to run for office, especially if you're watching this show. And if you are angry, and you should be. In terms of Anne's question on the court, I think it is also up to us to create the political will to expand and unpack the court. There is resistance to that right now because the myth that this is a nonpartisan, apolitical body is crumbling now, but it's still in place for too many people. I mean, this court has already been packed. Trump and McConnell and the Federalist Society packed it. That is what they spent 5 years doing. That is why they held open seats. That is why they stole seats. I mean, that was the whole purpose, is to get to this point. So I think it's up to us to continue to scream about that and to call our elected officials and explain, no, the courts are already gone. It's up to you who have power to do something to change that now.
And again, I just really want to emphasize, you can be the public official.
Yeah.
I mean, even something like being on the school board can really matter, because it's the school boards in local Florida counties that have been defying the governor and mandating masks in schools, despite the governor trying to make it illegal. So even at the local level, you can have a tremendous impact.
Yeah, and the Christian nationalists are coming for the school boards. They're coming for the city council. I mean, and they've been pretty damn explicit about it. So I think that's really fantastic advice.
It really is not the time to stay silent at all or be not engaged.
Yeah.
I wanted to just add to, who can we donate to? I think last week on the show, we mentioned a website, needabortion.org. That's going to give you a list of independent abortion funds in the state of Texas that are helping Texans get abortion care if they cannot afford it. We also have here, based in Wisconsin, the Women's Medical Fund, which was also started by FFRF's founder, Ann Gaylor. Really funding independent abortion providers, which do provide the bulk of abortions in this country, is really going to be helpful.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to say one more thing on the running for office thing, because I can't help myself.
Yeah.
It's so important. I know I used to, when I was doing my book talk before, in the before times, I would say that at the end. I would encourage people to run for office. And one question or pushback I would always get at the end was, I don't really feel qualified, or what skills do I have? And to which I just look at Marjorie Taylor Greene. Look at the people who are in office right now. You are as or more qualified, if you are watching this, than many of the people in office. So don't let that be an excuse. Do it anyway. Anyway, okay.
Exactly.
I'm going to get off my soapbox and all of this.
So Steve Casper asks, how exactly is the governor of Texas going to stop rape? I don't know if you guys saw this clip. Did you?
I did see the clip. Yes, I mean, built into the law is no exception for rape or incest. And Governor Abbott was asked about that at a press conference. It was yesterday or the day before. I'm not sure which day. And he basically said, "Well, we're gonna. First of all, they have 6 weeks in which to get an abortion, which is not true, as we talked about already." And second of all, we're going to stop rape from happening in Texas, which, hey, why haven't you done that already, Governor Abbott? If you're capable of doing that, what's the holdup? So
why did you keep that quiet?
I don't know. I mean, it's nonsense, and it shows how heartless this whole endeavor truly is.
So another question, again from Anne, is can you explain, I think, Professor Corbin, this is for you, can you explain how passing the ERA would help?
Sure. If we would, and my battery is low, so if I vanish, I'm sorry. I will try and move after I answer this. If we passed an Equal Rights Amendment, then it would be women would have equality under the Constitution. And part of women's equality is very much bound up with reproductive rights, right? Because as I mentioned before, women can't really be considered equal if we don't have equal ability to participate in the life of our country, socially, economically, in all those ways. And so abortion is as much an equality right as it is a liberty right.
Okay. Yeah. Well, another question from Christopher Gates. I'm a white, cisgendered male in Texas. I have a wife and 3 teenage daughters who are devastated by this government overreach and outright oppression. What is the best way for me to be an ally and a supporter for them and help get this ridiculous law reversed?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on some of that already. I think it is important for white dudes like us to speak out. I feel like if we had done more speaking out against this in the past, we might not have ended up at this point. I have a sister in Texas who is pregnant right now. I am deathly afraid for her because abortion is healthcare. And there are complications throughout pregnancies, especially in the United States, where we're not quite tops in the developed world. And I'm scared. I'm scared for her. I'm scared for everyone in Texas. And I don't have all the answers, and I'm certainly not an expert on this, but donating to some of those funds and getting active with some of those local grassroots groups that are going to be doing this is going to be absolutely important. And I mean, Rebecca, I know you share some stories.
Yeah, I mean, I had a stillbirth in the second trimester, and one of the unfortunate realities is that I was also then introduced to a whole world of women who in their second trimester find out that things are going horribly wrong in their pregnancies and that they have to make these heartbreaking decisions on babies that they really, really want. And one of my good friends wrote an article for Slate about her twin pregnancy. She was from Wisconsin and was having twins. She was afflicted with twin transfusion syndrome, needed to get care for that, and ended up being sent to Ohio, a clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. And while she was there, she ended up going into preterm labor at 18 weeks. But under the Ohio state law, she was unable to terminate that pregnancy. And they ceased giving her care for a while until 2 doctors then signed off on, progressing labor. They knew, at 18 weeks, the babies are not going to survive if they are born. But having her sit there in the hospital for 24 to 48 hours was going to put her life in danger. So she wrote this really heartbreaking piece on how these types of laws in Texas, or any sort of 20-week ban, really, really affects people at any stage of pregnancy, and how awful it is, and how traumatic it is to put women through this.
Yeah, I mean, it injects the state into questions of basic health care on some of the most intimate questions there are. And I think that's what a lot of people, the other side has been very good about wiping that out of the conversation and just making it about what Professor Corbin said earlier, where it's just people who just want to have sex, and that's what abortion's all about. And it's just they've done such a good job of just destroying the debate when it comes to that. Professor Corbin, I don't know if you got to hear that question, or if you want to jump in on that answer now that you're back.
I think you both answered it.
Okay.
So we just have 2 final questions. This one they're both from Will Kuhn. The first is, could miscarriages be considered abortions for these bounty hunters?
So I think, well, first, it's important to emphasize that women themselves cannot be hauled in. These laws cannot target the women themselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that to the extent that there are other circumstances where miscarriages might get you into trouble with the law, this is not one of them for the women who miscarry. But to the extent that this law is really open to abuse and open to frivolous lawsuits, there's nothing to prevent someone from suing regarding a miscarriage. Mm-hmm. And the person who's just, the people around this woman who might have just suffered a devastating miscarriage might still have to defend it.
And there is a history too of the state going after women in cases of miscarriage and other types of pregnancy loss, isn't there? Where
yes, there. As I'm saying, there are other laws where women might really have to. The woman who's already suffered the miscarriage herself might have to worry, but in this case, it's just those around her who might still be at risk. Because again, I want to highlight that there's nothing. Well, I should say, under the Texas law, the person bringing a claim has nothing to lose because they would never be responsible for attorney's fees. I did read a really interesting op-ed that suggested that that we bring in federal law that what is it? I don't know. There is a federal law. Let me say that there is a federal law that bans two or more people from conspiring to deprive someone of their constitutional rights. And this law was originally enacted to prevent vigilantism by the KKK. And I think it was Larry Tribe who was arguing we should really mobilize this law and apply it to people trying to bring suit under the Texas law, because they are basically trying to deprive people of their constitutional rights. And if it were made clear that they would be susceptible under federal law for conspiring to deprive someone of their constitutional rights, maybe the Texas law might be deprived of its force.
Well, that's kind of a good segue into our last question, where Will Kuhn asks, can we weaponize this law and clog the courts with lawsuits seeking a $10,000 bounty from legislators? Probably won't win except by default, but it will force these lawmakers to defend themselves in courts across the state.
Yeah, I mean, you run into problems finding a lawyer that's willing to take a case without any factual basis. You get disbarred for that. And I can tell you that the other side is going to come after the lawyers that do that for sure. I mean, that's what's happening with some of the Kraken lawsuits right now. You're seeing sanctions being levied against these lawyers who brought cases with no factual or legal basis whatsoever, just simply promoting the big lie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have seen in the news reported that there have been a couple of websites set up to help implement these laws, and they have been flooded with less than accurate claims.
Yes.
With the goal of making it impossible to actually get anything going. So I think there are a lot of tutorials on TikTok about how to do that. I think the websites have currently been taken down, and I don't know if there is one, because here's another thing people do is who's ever hosting it, you can certainly let the host of these services you can certainly express your displeasure with the host of these services.
Yeah. And that did happen. GoDaddy yanked. It was Texas Right to Life's form.
So I'm saying there's there are different levels of activism that you can be involved in. You don't want to get in politics. You can send an email complaining to whoever is hosting. You can check out these TikTok videos yourself.
You can't mess with the TikTokers. They really...
The TikTok generation's going to save us.
They know, they know what's up. Oh.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Corbin, for joining us. We are out of questions and out of time, but we really appreciate you spending the last hour with us. It was really insightful.
I am so delighted that you asked me. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for being on. And if you're watching this, if you're not angry, you are not paying attention. And if you want to help, you really need to be clamoring for court reform. Please, please, please. Start making noise about unpacking and correcting and rebalancing all of the courts. Start that yesterday. That is our show, Ask an Atheist for the week. Check out FFRF's other shows. You can watch Free Thought Matters on TV stations around the U.S. on Sunday mornings. You can check ffrf.org for stations and times in your area. And while you're there, please become a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Thank you. See you next week.